Hi, this is Paul. It's a little bonus material for my channel as if I needed any. This is Holy Week and Good Friday is coming upon us, so I'll have a message on Good Friday. We have a service at 7 p.m. on Good Friday, and which if you want to stream live, you can find it over on the church website, livingstonecrc.com. And I'll be talking about, have a little sermon on the crucifixion of Jesus, and then obviously Sunday is Easter, so there'll be a sermon on the resurrection of Jesus. Some of you all would often wonder about the relationship between my, my day job and my YouTube presence. They're quite intertwined in many ways. It's the same head that this stuff is coming out of. I just did a commentary, released the first part. The second part will be released tomorrow morning. I'll release this afternoon, I think. On Jordan Peterson, his conversation with Russell Brand, and on Michaela Peterson, although she didn't get a chance to talk too much. But they got into Job a bit. And the relationship between Job and Jesus is something that has been growing on me after my sermon that I preached on Luke 15, which is the parable of the prodigal son. Because in many ways, the Job in the Old Testament represents the perfect man. There's a sermon by a Jewish rabbi that someone had pointed me to. Actually, it was John Van Donk that pointed me to, and Jacob picked it up and posted it on the server, which was quite interesting about how Job is portrayed as the perfect man. He's perfect in terms of his religious observance, and he's perfect. He sacrifices for his children, etc. And he's perfect in terms of his social justice credentials. And that's in another chapter in Job. And I set that out in my sermon on Luke 15. Now, Jesus is crucified, and each of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of course, have their own presentation of the crucifixion. The synoptic theory holds that Mark of Matthew, Mark, and Luke is the first of them, and it seems that Luke and Matthew have Mark in front of them, and so the deviations from Mark are intentional because Matthew and Luke mentions that he uses sources. There's, of course, a theoretical source often called Q to try to account for the commonalities between Matthew and Luke. Were there other sources we don't know, other eyewitnesses we don't know? You can always read Baucham's Jesus and the Eyewitnesses if you want to read up on some of that theory. But so what's part of what a pastor does during something like Holy Week when I'll be preaching on Luke is I read Luke in conjunction with Matthew, Mark, and John to a degree. I always sort of keep an eye on John when you're working in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but you tend to focus on the other of the synoptic gospels as you go through. And you look for themes and emphases and differences. One of the things that comes right off the bat is you have the story of Simon of Cyrene, where and they let him away. They seized Simon, a certain man of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and placed a cross on him to carry it behind Jesus. And a great crowd of people were following him, and the women were mourning and lamenting him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourself and for your children. For behold, days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren, and wombs that did not give birth, and breasts that did not nurse. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" And I mentioned that text because this Sunday, on Luke and Palm Sunday, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. Also, that passage of call to the mountains to fall on us. I think the NIV has a footnote drawing that to Revelation 6, where it's very interesting because the great and the small of the earth in Revelation 6 call on the mountains to fall on them. In the second commentary tomorrow, Jordan Peterson will talk about the book of Revelation a little bit with his conversation with Russell Brand. But Jesus basically says here, don't cry for me, Jerusalem. You're going to have to cry for yourself because you didn't listen. You didn't recognize God's coming, and you didn't listen. You don't know what would bring you peace. You thought that your continual political struggles would bring you peace, and they won't. And in fact, peace won't come. Part of what's also interesting about Luke is that the two that are crucified with Jesus in Matthew and Mark are called lestai, which are brigands or insurgents. And that makes perfect sense because, of course, the Romans crucified revolutionaries, people who were trying to overthrow Rome, because crucifixion was not just a criminal penalty, it was a political demonstration for those who dared to defy the power of Rome. But as also in the ancient world, it's not simply a political demonstration because politics and religion were one. And so the Roman gods were, of course, the victorious gods over the world. And as the armies of Rome prevailed, that was a demonstration that their gods were great. Now, all the way back to the time of, Israel's relationship with the gods obviously gets set up in the Exodus, when Moses and the Lord basically kick the stuffing out of Pharaoh, and then they are delivered. And what you find throughout the story of Israel is this question of obedience. If Israel will obey God, if Israel will fulfill her terms of the covenant, then God will bless them. And if Israel fails the covenant, then God will curse them. In terms of the word, which is very popular in our culture now because of influence from the East, karma. This is very karmic. Do good things happen. Do bad things happen. Obey God, God will reward you. Cross God or disobey God, and God will punish you. This is also sort of basic religion. And this, of course, comes out of a world in which either there's a meta-divine realm where there are subsidiary gods in charge who will reward or punish, or more of a Hebraic sense in which God is both Arenic and Agentic, and just read in the book of Deuteronomy, fulfill the law and you will be blessed and you'll have many children and your crops will grow and all of that. Don't fulfill the covenant and you will be cursed. That's the basic frame and setup. Now, of course, the book of Job comes along and begins to mess with that. The book of Job comes along and says, that is not all there is. That is not all that is not necessary. That is not the whole story, because Job, of course, is the perfect man and things go bad for him, and his friends come and say, we know the rule of karma. You are an evildoer. You must be a secret evildoer because you look righteous, but there must be some hidden sin. So confess your hidden sin and then God will restore you. And Job keeps saying, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And then Job is angry with God and wants to basically put God on trial. And of course, God shows up and basically says, do you really know enough to enter the prosecutorial chair and put me on the stand, O little man? And Job places his hand over his mouth, and then Job is restored. Job does sacrifices for his friends because the Lord basically says, I remain on Job's side. You all are in trouble, and so Job will intercede for you, and then Job is blessed, and the story is done. And so in that way, Jesus comes into this story of Job in a pretty significant way. And in Luke's telling of the crucifixion, what is highlighted are now they're not lestai in Luke, they're evildoers. And I'll just pull up the word here, verse 32. We'll pull up let it say it.
Kakurgos.
There it is. These are evildoers. Now, that's a very generic term. It's, in fact, we use those kind of terms all the time. There's good people or bad people. Well, this person did something bad, but that doesn't mean they're a bad person. Oh, what do you mean by that? Well, this is sort of the language game that we play. They did this, but they're not a bad person. Oh, okay. I thought the definition of being a bad person is you do bad things. Well, everybody does some bad things. All of this has been filtered through generations of Christian influence in the West. And so 2 criminals were led away to be executed with him. And now all of the Gospels have these 2 with Jesus, but Luke pays special attention to them because they're mentioned right off at the beginning of the story, not in the same way that Matthew or Mark or John do, they're highlighted in here. And when they came to the place called the Skull, they were crucified with him. And the evildoers, see, when a translation like this uses criminals, we tend to think about, okay, crime, sort of a legal framework. And I'd like us to think more in terms of a karmic framework, evil and good, good people, bad people. So these were bad people that were being crucified with Jesus. Now, also in Luke, all of the Gospels have these stories, but it's emphasized in Luke. Now, if you're going to describe the scene, every author practices some relevance realization and makes choices about what to focus on. Look at how much focus is on here in Luke on mockery and Jesus' impotence to rescue himself. And the people stood there watching, but the rulers ridiculed him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself. If this man is the Christ of God, the anointed of God, the chosen one." What does that mean? Well, someone, let's say you're a polytheist, you would have power because you have a relationship with a God, and what that God would do was intervene in this calamity. And we see this in our superhero movies, because if we see someone who is a good person, and I was just watching the Justice League, and right towards the end when the cyber guy, the cyborg was separating the mother boxes, and Steppenwolf was going to take his big axe down and stop him. Superman comes and takes the blow, but of course he's the Man of Steel, and so he isn't hurt, and he looks up at Steppenwolf, and he proceeds to beat the living crap out of Steppenwolf and kick him back into his master's throne room. That is the normal drama by which good and evil are played out. Now, that drama itself assumes a purposive universe, at least to a degree, where there are good and evil powers, where there is in a sense meaning and order. Now, in our modern frame, there are others who will say that history is purposeless. There is no purpose in the world, and so any good or evil is relative to human beings, okay, or relative to the gods. I mean, depending on how you want to scale this up. But basically, the thing to pay attention to here is that if Jesus is a superhero, he should be able to save himself. If he is chosen by God, if he is the anointed one of God, that's what Messiah or Christ means, he should be able to come down from the cross, because God would not allow such injustice to happen. Now, the Hebrews have been playing with these ideas for a very long time, because obviously when the idea in the book of Jeremiah was that God would not allow his temple to be destroyed. And so in the book of Jeremiah, the people of Jerusalem, the temple of the Lord, God won't let these bad things happen to his temple. And so therefore you can sort of hold God hostage by his temple. And God says, try me. And so, of course, the Babylonians come down and they destroy the temple. Read the book of Ezekiel, and they start processing this. And this comes down to a process by which Israel comes to understand that their God is in fact the God of the whole earth, whereas just being subsumed into the pantheon of the Chaldeans, which is what the normal process would be. And the Jews continue to hold out. They continue to be revolutionary storytellers in a polytheistic world, but these same karmic forces are at work. So, and the soldiers mocked him. And the soldiers also mocked him. So here you have, again, you've got this culture war. So you've got those who would like to see the overthrow of the Roman Empire mocking him. And you've got those who are instilling the suppression of the Jewish people mocking him. Everybody is mocking him. Why are they mocking him? Because, well, Jesus hasn't yet changed the value hierarchy so that victims have status. Everybody understands that a victim is a loser by God. That the victim's moral poverty and power poverty is on demonstration by the crucifixion. That's the entire point of the political execution. And saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. The sign was placed over him as a mocking sign because, well, any king would have his servants come and rescue him. Where are those angels that show up in Luke 2 in Bethlehem when he is, Satan says, jump from the pinnacle of the temple, and the angels will keep your foot from being smashed. Well, where are the angelic intercessors who are going to save Jesus from this? And in fact, Islam understands these questions. This is common world religion, and this story is written like this. Now, when we Americans read this story, those things just flow over us because this idea of cosmic justice has sort of been diluted. Not completely, because whenever you talk about the long arc of history or the long arc of justice through history, well, someone might ask, well, plot that for me on your philosophical or religious framework, because if the universe is just chaos, meaningless chaos, well, then that's obviously out the door. Is that romance? I want to do a commentary on Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook's The Rest is History podcast on communism, because in many ways what you see in something like Karl Marx or Hegel is that these Christian ideas sort of get philosophized into ideas about historical progression and some of those types of ideas. If you're the king of Jews, save yourself. And there was an inscription over him. This is the king of the Jews. And the point is being made over and over and over and over and over again in this that, well, what is happening? Is Jesus a loser? Is Jesus without power? Is Jesus now a victim of swords and shields and political machinery? How can we understand Jesus? Job, in some ways, has set us up to say, well, the karmic equation isn't quite so simple. And the Hebrew prophets have set up and said, well, the karmic equation isn't quite so simple. So what exactly is happening as Jesus is crucified? Now, again, one of the criminals who was hanging there reviled him, saying, are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. Same point. And Luke keeps repeating this again and again and again. Why? Because he's making the point about karma. Anyone who's crucified is an evildoer. And so there's the question. Is Jesus an evildoer? Is Jesus impotent? Does Jesus not have a relationship with a god or the gods or the God? Or does Jesus not have power? But the other answered and rebuked him, saying, do you not even fear God? What's happening? How would God allow his son to be crucified? Because you are undergoing the same condemnation. And we indeed justly, for we are receiving what we deserve, because they are evildoers. Remember, in Luke, they're evildoers, they're brigands or insurgents in Matthew and Mark. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. When we read this, after 2,000 years of influence from Jesus, it doesn't make an impact. But it's a revelation of astounding faith, because the assertion is by this other evildoer, and we've seen Luke play with these ideas. Jesus, friend of sinners, Luke 15. So here's an evildoer who is receiving what karma demands. Justice. And he pleads to Jesus. And he says, he has faith in Jesus. What faith? That Jesus is going to come into his kingdom. And everybody looking around is basically saying at the same time, there is no kingdom for you to come into, because karma is it. And he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Well, how will that kingdom come? Again, we looked at levels of being, as Russell Brand talked about. Well, he is clearly positing some other realm in which Jesus will reign, and that realm will, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He's clearly setting this thing up. And Jesus responds to him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. There's enormous faith exhibited by this other evildoer on the cross. And again, we are so accustomed to thinking that Jesus basically creates. Now, some of these ideas were around. You can find them at the end of the book of Daniel, that part of what develops in Jewish theology is a belief in vindication by resurrection. Okay? And that's what you see basically at the end of the book of Daniel. Vindication by resurrection, which of course sets up Easter, which is vindication by resurrection. So I'll read a little bit more. By this time it was about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, because the light of the sun had failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn down the middle. Okay, darkness. Well, what is darkness? Well, that's one of the plagues. But it's falling on Jesus, and it's falling on Jerusalem. And so the crowd was imagining, well, maybe Jesus will come to Jerusalem with his miraculous power and, like Moses, get rid of the Romans by a plague. And darkness is one of the plagues. It's a sign of the day of the Lord. And the curtain of the temple is torn down the middle. What does that mean? Well, the temple was always sort of a divine containment unit. And if you read the Old Testament, God breaks out. And, well, the curtain being torn is God breaking out. And when God breaks out, it's calamity on the land. Okay? And Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit. And after this he expired. And the centurion saw what had happened and began to praise God, saying, certainly this man was righteous. Okay, why is he saying that? You're seeing the continual devolution of karma that begins in the book of Job and comes all the way here to Jesus. And now you had an evildoer. And remember, the central conflict, the central culture war is between the Jews who want liberation from Rome and the Romans who are keeping them down. And so now we have a centurion, an evil occupier, who recognizes what this other evildoer recognizes, that somehow the world is changing and karma is losing its grip. Well, are you going to lose justice if you lose karma? Or is there, in fact, other layers in which the story gets told? And all the crowds that came together for the spectacle, when they saw the things that happened, they returned home beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee, who saw these things, stood at a distance. Why do they beat their breasts? Well, because, they were looking for justice. And now they're not so sure. One of the commentaries, Joel Green, it's one of my favorite commentaries on the Gospel of Luke, notes that as the story progresses, the crowd, which at the beginning is all full of their justice, now they're not quite so sure about karma. And Jesus starts this. Now, this is going to continue to filter and transform our assumptions about good and evil in the world, all the way up to today. And we can point to Tom Holland's book, Dominion, in this. This is going to remap our ideas of justice. Now, what's interesting is that in the secular realm, I think, in some ways tries to appropriate these ideas, but can't really pull them off. And I think Miroslav Volf shows that really well in his book Exclusion and Embrace, with respect to the dregs of communism with the fall of Yugoslavia. All justice has to be meted out in this world because there is no other in which to actually process this. And you see some of that in the woke, because, and now we're sort of back into the questions of Christian eschatology that were large and in charge at the end of the Civil War in the United States. The YouTube algorithm served up for me the Bible Thumping Wingnut channel. He had done some commenting on Jordan Peterson. Oh, look, another guy with white beard on the bottom and no hair on the top. And served up for me a video from a couple of days ago, John MacArthur, It's Too Late for America. And so where he basically goes into the end of John MacArthur's sermon, and it's very interesting because, well, Americans have failed to live up to God's standard. He goes into Romans 1, and therefore there will be judgment on America. It's so interesting how these themes develop in our culture in terms of eschatology, in terms of identity, in terms of... Now, I thought actually MacArthur made the right move in that sermon where he said all nations are under judgment. And so, whereas someone might look at John MacArthur and complain, oh, Christian nationalism. Yeah, but at least most who are dealing with the Bible understand to one degree or another that America is not Israel. But yet, at the same time, I don't know about a lot of nuance with respect to many of these questions of justice and karma. But I wanted to bring this in. I wanted to bring this in partly because of the conversation on Job, the conversation with Russell Brand, and how what happens here in the crucifixion is really a continuation of Job and a sign that eschatology matters because it impacts, well, what we do in the world right now. You know, I see this kind of thing like It's Too Late for America, and I always kind of want to ask, when wasn't it? When isn't it too late for every kingdom of the world? And how then are you citizens of America and the kingdom of God? And of course, John MacArthur will talk about the elect, and I'm thinking maybe I could do a little bit of commentary on that video too, because it raises some issues. But it's coming to be Good Friday, and this is just sort of the first thoughts on my sermon, but I think I'm going to continue to work through these issues of Job and Jesus, and really in many ways is it the deconstruction of karma, or is it the understanding that there's sowing and reaping, let's say, which is not exactly like karma. Karma in a theological sense in Hinduism is sort of a moral balancing act, and it's imperfect, and that gets into obviously other ideas about the nature of the world. But I wanted to point out that it's very interesting because, again, when we read Luke, all these questions about nature of the world and nature of reality really hold. And it's very interesting. As a pastor, part of what I always do is I'm trying to mind read my audience and say, what are their assumptions? And I got to draw this to a close and post this up. So leave a comment. Thanks for listening.